So we're continuing on our adventure in the wilderness. Exodus 32 is where we are at today. We have made it past the law, at least the section of law that was brought up before. So in this section of law, we have covered all sorts of things. We've covered some civil stuff on what to do with their government. We've looked at ceremonial things about what to do with their priesthood and sacrifices at the tabernacle. And we've seen some moral law sandwiched in there, but also repeated over and over. This was all before God sent Moses up onto the mountain. God revealed this law and definitely revealed the Ten Commandments before he was brought up onto the mountaintop, where he got the inscribed version by God. So keep that in mind when you realize what's happening in 32. God has already told them the Ten Commandments. God has already told them, this is what you are going to do for the tabernacle. This is what you're going to do to worship me, and how to worship me, what to form, what to use, all these details. God's already given that to them. So here we go. Chapter 31, we'll give the last verse, and this is it. And he gave to Moses, when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, the 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone, written with the finger of God. Verse 1 of 32. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in your ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, for your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you.'" So there's a lot going on. Let's unpack it. In verse 1, what does it say was the reason that the people gathered themselves together? Moses took too long. Took too long doing what? He spent too long talking to God. On the mountain, God invited him to go up. "How dare you, Moses? You're spending far too much time away from us. Spending far too much time with that God up there. You are not fitting what I think is an acceptable timetable." And the people got impatient. Now, granted, they were impatient because they truly didn't know, is he dead? He's been up there 40 days and 40 nights. It's kind of fair to start questioning, right? But Instead of their solution being, hey, Aaron, please, could you maybe ask God, what's going on with Moses? Is he okay? Can you approach him and find out some wisdom for us? Do you think that you could help guide us because that's your role? Now that the prophet's gone, you're the priest, you are the high priest that has that responsibility to stand in between God and man. Could you please? They said, no. We are going to gather up and demand that Aaron make gods for us. Why did they do that? They wanted something else to worship. Okay.
They're still in the Egypt mode.
Still in Egypt mode. What do you mean by that?
Hadn't been too long that they hadn't left Egypt.
Yes.
They have the Egyptians have all their gods, and they're used to it.
So they're used to worshiping God, a God,
Something that they can see.
something physical that they can see. And apparently to them, the mountain that was still filled with smoke and lightning and fire and thunder constantly for 40 days, 40 nights, that's not enough. They wanted something that they had an influence on. They wanted to craft something that fit what they thought worship should look like.
I think it was something that they was familiar with too.
Mm-hmm.
You always go back to what you're more comfortable with.
Absolutely.
A routine.
Yep.
And what you can control.
And what you can control. We want to be able to think that we have some sort of control over anything, but even our spiritual life. We want to.
They even had control in the sense that they gave up the golden rings and whatever else to make it.
Yeah. So interesting thing about that is that Aaron, the commentaries that I was reading was saying that Aaron was actually asking them on purpose to make a sacrifice, hoping that they would say no. He's like, they're not going to fall for this. Everybody wants something until it costs them something. If I just give, some sort of sacrifice that they have to give, something precious to them, because you can't go just randomly get gold anywhere, especially your gold earrings that you earned back there for being a slave. You can't go back and get those. So what if I ask for that? They'll just say no.
That's not how it reads, though. I guess it's in the language where it kind of has that.
Yeah, in the language and in the way that he always seemed to try to turn it back to Yahweh. Like they were saying gods, and the word there is Elohim, so meaning spiritual being among them. But then when Aaron would talk, he would say the Lord. He would say Jehovah or Yahweh, Yorevahe, specifically trying to recognize and tell them it's not just any God, it is Yahweh that we're worshiping. We're going to have a feast day to Yahweh. And so he was kind of reluctant to it. So by him asking for this sacrifice, his hope was that they would not actually do it.
That you would think that with them offering all of their stuff, that he would be like, look, I was just trying to test y'all. Just
Yeah, like I'm just joking.
by that thinking. I mean,
Because then he makes the calf, and then he also
Yeah,
built
he
an
made it.
altar before it. So like, it seemed like he was doing a whole lot to just.
But he still got to go to the promised land. Moses struck a rock.
We say that, but think about this. Let's say, how many people we got now? 30? Let's say I had to tell 29 of y'all no. Let's say all y'all want a pepperoni pizza. I want cheese. If all of y'all say y'all want pepperoni, I'm not gonna say, hey, you know what? We need to all go cheese. And that's just against 30 people. How many people they had? 2 million? You gonna tell 2 million people no?
No.
I'm not gonna make this golden calf? Think about it.
2 million bored, hungry,
Yeah. Panicky.
panicky.
Yeah, so man, it's
Do you think there's a difference between the way men think and women think? Because I'm just not there.
I'm not either.
You built the whole altar
get it.
Yeah.
Has let me check with mom not been invented yet?
I'm a people pleaser.
Yeah.
Wait, what
That
was
comes
it
later.
again?
That comes later.
No,
Let me check with mom first.
Oh.
because at this point it would have been, let me
would've
check
been
with
Dad.
Yeah.
and he was up on the mountain. So big brother Aaron, he was the one who was in charge, and he was supposed to know. But $2 million people who are angry, who are freaked out and panicking, pressuring you, and you're one guy?
But then why not say, instead of say, hey, give me your gold and so I can make a calf, how about I ask, go check and see where Joshua is, see if he knows anything, and go from there instead of say, oh, let's make a new god.
And he was also raised in Egypt. I mean, this was also familiar to him too. And
I think he was common sense nowadays.
Fearing for life.
Can we assume maybe he did some of that?
We don't know.
Maybe so.
We don't know.
Write it down.
We don't know because it didn't get written down. But what we do know is he's fearing for his life, probably. It is familiar.
So at this time, were the Ten Commandments brought down to them yet?
The Ten Commandments had been verbally told to them and repeated multiple times to them.
But
The-
the actual Ten Commandments,
The stones had not yet come down
so how did they find out about it?
because
I mean,
God.
because
You missed those chapters, but God came down, had Israel line up around the mountain, and he spoke to them out of the cloud, verbally saying, here are my 10 commandments. And then the people said, that's too terrifying. Moses, you're now the guy who's going to be in between us because that's too scary for us. So then Moses receives these other laws that we covered over the last few weeks, and they were told to them, and then the people all said, we'll follow those, including the 10 Commandments. We'll follow those. Are you sure? Yes, we'll follow those. All right, we'll make a covenant. We'll follow those. And they didn't. And so it's multiple times that God had already told them. They affirmed, yes, we'll follow them. But 40 days passed where they weren't doing nothing, and they weren't moving forward where they thought they would be moving forward to. And Moses is up there. Aaron now thinks, we can build this thing, but then I'll convince them that this is Yahweh. And that way we won't be, we'll still be worshiping Yahweh, but we'll just do it the way that we're familiar with. We'll worship God the way we like to worship Him. And as their leader, I can make sure that that happens. So there's a little bit of manipulation in here. There's a little bit of fear of the people. And he's making decisions, life or death situation, trying to think through things. And this is the best strategy he had. Let's just placate the people so they don't kill me.
Yeah.
But he was also asking for them to bring gold in hopes of deterring them. But it's funny how people are willing to, what people are willing to sacrifice to whatever they deem worthy.
I think they was anxious to see it was actually going to happen. I think the reason why they gave them their gold is like they was anxious for them, for Moses or for Aaron to fulfill his word.
So like, is Aaron going to actually follow through with this? I don't, very, yeah, he's taking too long. We need something.
He was anxious and they just came off of it.
But I want you to think about this. How much money do you spend in a month? You don't have to say it, but just think about how much money you spend in a month. How much money do you spend on your house so that you can live? Too much, okay. How much money do you spend on your car insurance and gas and food? It feels like too much, but you do it anyway. How much do you spend on internet? Can you live without internet? How much do you spend on your phone? Can you live without your phone? How much do you spend on cable and streaming services and all these entertainment things? You can live without that, but you choose not to. You choose to spend money on these things. But then I say, hey guys, God says give 10% of your income. Just right off the top, before you spend any money anywhere else, give 10% of your income. Then we can use that to spread the gospel worldwide. Now, here, let me tell you, if you don't give your 10%, you're missing out on a blessing. Far, far greater blessing than Hulu will provide. But also, we might not be able to go worldwide. We will make disciples, and we will make disciples right here to the best of our ability. But what if we could bring the gospel all the way to the ends of the world? If all of us would work together and we would be faithful with our tithe. And you're like, I can't afford that. My budget won't allow it. How much did you spend that you didn't need to spend? We will invest in what we see to be important. And strangely, we invest in a whole lot of golden calves we don't even think about.
Yes, we do. Maybe it just rubs against what I think I thought about it.
What do you mean?
'Cause I've just never heard that perhaps Aaron not set them up. Well, I mean, set them up to do right, which they just didn't do. Right. There's that.
Okay. You might not know this, but there is a tax on cigarettes. There's a tax on tobacco. It's apparently a lot. I don't really know.
There's a tax on everything.
There's a tax on everything, but the amount of tax that is on tobacco is higher than any other that we can think of. Yet people still do that. People still spend their money.
It's a habit.
It's a habit. It's what we're familiar with. We got into it just a little bit at a time, and then it grew into something that we're so familiar with we can't live without it.
A want became a need.
These people do what we do, and we pay a great price. To satisfy the passions that we deem worthy. I think it's interesting. Think about it this way. If I were to tell you, guys, there is somebody who will die and go to hell if you don't give money, what you gonna do? You're gonna give money. If you knew that person. But if I told you they're in Africa, we've never met them yet, but God's sending us there, would you give? I don't know. See, when our golden calf is right in front of us, when it is possible for us to touch this thing, because God was untouchable. They couldn't get their hands on it. They had no involvement. But here, they get to give. And then he's going to form something out of what they gave. You know, what did they give? The earrings that they got for being slaves. Funny thing, they just traded their slavery for something else. When we come to Christ, we're trading our slavery for freedom. And then, strangely, just like them, we pick up the slavery again. They intentionally built a god to be enslaved to. Though they were not slaves, they could and would not leave the familiar slave life behind. You and I are legally freed in the spiritual. We are freed from the law of sin and death. We do not have to obey anything the world has. We don't have to worship God the way that the world does. We don't have to fear. We don't have to anything. And yet we still choose to be enslaved by that. And it costs us greatly. So the impatience, the fear, the sensuous religious habits tempted them to go into the familiar habits that they could control. They said, when they looked at this, they said, these, even though it was one, this golden calf, these are the gods that brought us out of Egypt. No, it's not. You know what's scary to me? I've been in church all my life, and I have seen golden calves. I can recognize golden calves. Sometimes those golden calves look like carpet color. I've been in churches where that we literally have debated for an hour in the business meetings about the carpet color and how it matched the deacons' jackets. And we couldn't change that color because that is our color. And it was about this green here, kind of a mixture between, it was a weird green, but this was causing division in the church. It was causing us to spend, and I'm like 8 years old, and instead of hearing the gospel, I'm hearing about carpet color. And I'm seeing these grown-ups whining about carpet color and how important carpet color is, and I'm not quite getting it. But you're like, man, that's dumb. That's embarrassing.
It just looks like something different.
It looks just a little bit different here. But we all have it. We have it in the church. We have it in our homes. We have golden calves. There's a quote that if I can find it in my notes, I want to share it with you. But it is St. Augustine. Nope. Okay, never mind. Oh, it's on the back. John Calvin, man's nature, so to speak, is a perpetual idol factory. In our nature, we want someone to worship. We want something to worship. And if we can't worship the one true God, or the one true God freaks us out and doesn't meet our expectations, we will form a God in our own image. The sad thing is you become what you worship. It happened with Israel. They were worshiping a golden calf, and so God, for 40 years, brought them around, led them like cattle through the wilderness until they learned to trust Him and follow Him. You and I will become what we idolize. So, be careful, especially careful if you idolize a new president. Because I do not want you to become like what you idolize. But what if we worship anything besides God? What will happen to us?
We won't be healthy.
We won't be healthy.
We'll be misled too.
Yep. Okay, so I have done this before. We've talked about a model like this before, but let me explain in the New Testament, these idols are slightly different. So they don't look like golden calves. They look like strongholds. They look like castles, fortresses that are in our mind, patterns of thinking that we have in our mind that cause us to automatically behave in a certain way. Okay? So our beliefs are built up, and these are truly mental idols that we worship, that we give our attention, our praise, that they control us and influence us. But oftentimes, we don't know what these strongholds are. We don't know why we're struggling financially. We're making enough money, but the money seems to be going out the door and we just don't know where it is. Why is this a consistent pattern? I don't know. So normally when we see a stronghold, we see what I'm going to call surface idols. These are the strongholds or the evidence, the fruit for the root that's in our soul. Okay? So surface idols are things we can easily see on the outside. That would be color of carpet. That's just a surface idol. Who cares about color of carpet, really? But there was something deeper going on. A need or a desire that was not being met. And truly, those are, the way I'm going to say it is source idols. And there's really just 4 of those. I'm going to hand out a sheet of paper, and hopefully there's enough. If there's not, beat up your neighbor to steal it from them, because we can ignore God's law about stealing, right?
I get one, but Amy.
So on this,
Come here, and we're going to share.
on the side, the left side when you're looking at it, you're going to see 4 rows. And these 4 rows are source idols. This is deep, deep, deep down. You can categorize our the idols that we worship in 4 ways. Okay? We worship power, worship approval. Did we stop somewhere along the way? Did we run that already? Oh, cool. Power, approval, comfort, and control. Power, approval, comfort, and control. That's fun.
Not an adventure.
It is an adventure. But kind of more like an adventure that Indiana Jones goes on. Life or death. It's crazy, chaotic. He meets a lot of weird characters along the way, including the enemy of his soul. But on this adventure, we are going to encounter source idols. When the Israelites were making this golden calf, somewhere along the way, they encountered this. It might have been that one of those Israelites was complaining, and they said, you know, I'm comfortable worshiping God the way I've always worshiped. I don't want to do these things that God has been asking me to do. I want to worship Him the way I want to worship Him, because that's what I've always known. And they worshiped the source idol of comfort. Others probably said, hey, if we're bullying to Aaron, he'll do what we say. If we cause a riot, if we get enough support behind us, we can make him do what we want him to do. And they might have wanted power. Some of them might have wanted control, saying, I want to be able to touch the God I worship. I want to be able to, in fact, influence the way that cow looks. I can tell you, Aaron probably suffered from approval. For whatever reason it was, he didn't want to die. He wanted to go with the flow. You know, it's easier. And so he made concessions, and it ended up doing this. making the golden calf. But here's how we can know. Okay, this is part of the lie. The first column is a lie. My life only has meaning or significance if I. For power, it's I am successful, have influence, and win. For approval, am affirmed, have relationships, feel loved, and people like me. Comfort, if I am free, if I have privacy, if no stress or risk, I feel pleasure. Or I have control, I am self-disciplined. I keep standards high, and I can control the certainty.
Sound like politicians.
Sounds like me. So why it goes unnoticed is because we gild it in gold. God earlier in the law told us He wanted our gold. He wanted us to fashion the gold into a lampstand. Well, what? I'm still offering my gold, right? Whatever they do with it, that's their thing. But I'm still doing it. We like to decorate our golden calves, and we do this with power. There, we call it confidence. We say you're being productive. You're successful. Approval, you get to be likable, friendly, fun. Comfort, you like laid back. Oh, they're just easygoing. Control, you are competent. You're diligent. You're self-disciplined. But here's the clues. Here's the surface stuff that bubbles up. For power, sometimes it's gambling, hoping that something will turn out, overcommitting, highly competitive. For approval, you're spineless. Avoid conflict to keep people happy. That one hurt, didn't it? Comfort, you feel boredom a lot. You're avoiding commitment. Control. If I want it done right, I have to do it myself. Why can't you just?
Yeah, maybe.
We all know who I am.
Let me tell you something. Let's all be careful. This is not you. These are the idols. These are the strongholds that the enemy is warping and twisting. Because we are to be self-controlled, are we not? That is a fruit of the Spirit, self-control. The Spirit that lives within us is not a spirit of fear, but He is of power. Not our power, but His power. Of love, so we are accepted. We can be comforted by God's love. And self-control, sound mind. But all of this is meant to be holy. The gold that they were giving away was meant to be fashioned in a different form. It was meant to bring light and carry the light for worshiping Yahweh. It was meant to be fashioned into the Ark of the Covenant. Imagine being able to give your earring to the Ark of the Covenant. That would have been so much cooler. The enemy wants to distort what God meant for good. Gold's not bad. Your desire for power is not necessarily bad when it's submitted to God. The worst nightmare here for this idol is humiliation. Power, approval is rejection. Comfort is stress or demands. And control is uncertainty. Here's the cost that it costs us, the price that we have to pay to keep it up. It costs us, we have to be burdened. We have excess responsibility. Price for approval, dependency, people pleasing. Comfort, lack of productivity, laziness. usually also fear. But control, loneliness, inflexibility. The price that other people pay when we serve and worship these gods for power, they are used and manipulated. Approvals, they're smothered, they're handled, they're pacified. Comfort, they're hurt or neglected. Control, condemned, judged, unloved. The greatest emotional temptation for power is anger and pride. Approval is cowardice, comfort, boredom, apathy, control, anxiety. Counterfeit gospel truth. Oof. Counterfeit gospel truth. What do I mean by that?
It's the opposite of the lie.
The opposite of the lie from the beginning. I only have meaning if. That is a counterfeit to the truth of God's grace. You know, because if you need power, you need people to think, or for you to know that you have influence. Well, God's got all of that. And He doesn't demand that you are powerful. God is satisfied exactly the way that you are. His power is made perfect in your weakness. That is His grace. It's a counterfeit. Approval, the approval of man, is a counterfeit to God's love, the unconditional love that you don't have to earn, you don't have to do anything for. You can be you, fully known by God and fully accepted and brought up into who He is. God's peace is all that we need. We don't need the counterfeit. We don't need the lack of stress. We need God's presence to bring us the peace. And control. God's sovereignty. He's got a plan that's bigger than you. He knows how it affects you. And you don't have control anyway. When we are to repent, we are to submit to the power of His grace, rest in His approval of you, find your comfort in God, and surrender to God's control. So, these source idols, we can sum it all up in these ways. I'm worshiping power. I'm going to become like this idol. But in the New Testament, we are commanded to keep ourselves from idols. Even in the New Testament, after Jesus, it's not like we're just freed. We have the same heart that all mankind has. A heart that is a idol factory. But here's the cool thing. All of that pain that you went through just now when I was describing those and reading those, and you're like, I am that and I don't like that. That describes my behavior. That is showing surface stuff, and I don't like that source thing. I don't like to admit that about myself. Nobody does. Sin is ugly. The golden calf is shiny, but it's embarrassing. But like I said on the sermon, we all stink. Everybody stinks. God is the answer. Repentance, the truth of God, replaces that and satisfies everything. But if we settle for the golden calf, we are going to be disappointed. Now, I know you want to say, but what if I redeem this? What if I let this calf stick around? And what if I just put up with it? I think that's what Aaron was doing. He built the thing and he thought, I can twist this to make it into a good thing. I know it seems like a bad thing, but maybe once Moses comes down, we can use this gold to build what God was wanting to build. But in the meantime, we'll just do this, but I will convince them that this is worshiping God. And then we won't be in trouble anymore. I can do that, right? I'm the high priest. So when it came time for it, he wasn't able to really redeem it. But they felt like it was fun. They felt like they were doing the right thing. They got up early, because we all like to do that. If we did, do we really need daylight savings? Come on. I was making a joke on Monday, and I said, well, Jen and I were talking, and she said that if a president wants to, or a presidential candidate wants to get in office, all they have to say is on Monday, guys, if I get in, no daylight savings. And whoever it said that first, they're going to get the vote, because nobody likes this.
I love it.
What?
I so do.
Free.
Sorry. I mean.
Gentle now. Gentle now.
I do.
But they woke up early. They were excited for the whole day that they got to worship God. They got up early. They started worshiping. They ate, drank, and rose up to play. That's kind of a fun way to do it, right? The interesting thing is that's what we are to do on Sabbath. We are not meant to work. We are meant to play. And they were sort of worshiping God. They were mostly doing what they were supposed to do to worship God. What if, is it possible that we come here on Sunday morning worshiping idols? We think that we're doing it close. We got up early, we put on our Mary Kay, we ate, we drank, and we are here to worship. we sort of worship God. But if we are honest with ourselves, we are here obviously not to worship ourselves. But we've got to call it what it is. That's why I gave you the source idol. I gave them the titles so that you know and you can identify. And once you name it, you can get rid of it. Once you name it, you can say, I'm going to beat that. But not me, God. Once you name it, you can defeat it. Once you name it, you'll be able to see how that thing, how that source idol is so different than the cross of God. The way to win is to repent, to confess it, own it, look at it for what it is. And for us, we turn and we look at who Jesus is. That he is the purest, unchanging solution that meets that longing in our heart. God knew what was going on down in the camp. Moses didn't know. The cool thing, if you want to do this analogy, I'm Moses as pastor. I don't know what's going on in your life. I don't know what kind of idols you're worshiping. Unless, I'm in the mix with you. You tell me what's going on. I don't really know. But God does. God knows exactly what it is you're worshiping down where you're sort of with him. And he doesn't like it. These idols that you're giving your heart over to, these lesser gods, infuriate God. He hates sin. I mean, if you're a parent and you just tell your kid, don't do blank, and then they look at you and do blank, you know a little hint of how God might feel. But in comparison to the holy, perfect, and wonderful God, and we choose cow. That would be embarrassing and frustrating. But more so, God absolutely abhors sin. That's why, to me, the chapter in Isaiah that talks about Jesus and the price that he paid for us, it says that God delights in crushing his son. I love you. I'm not going to delight if I have to sacrifice my son. By giving that son to the full weight of God's hatred of your sin. I'm not okay with that. Sorry, love you. I'm not God. But God knowingly said, I'm going to delight in crushing, not just putting a little bit, like giving him a little spanking, but absolutely crushing him with the full weight of hatred for your sin. And then God graciously offers that to you and says, here's your choices. Worship me or worship whatever else you want to worship. And even when you and I go the other way, at this point, God had not yet given all of his wrath onto Jesus. And so at this point, he was legally, it was okay for him to bring out his wrath, pour out his wrath. He was all in the right? They needed to learn their lesson, didn't they? They needed a spanking. They needed to know God was serious, that his 10 commandments were real, and that he is the only God worth worshiping. So God has a plan. I'm going to get them. Israel, you're idiots. Yes, I am. But then he says, hey, Moses, you and I, we're good. You're up here. We've spent 40 days. I'm going to crush every single one of those guys that you got out of here. I'm going to put my wrath on them, and then we'll just start over with you. You're part of the Abrahamic covenant. You'll fit that line. We're good with this. And Moses says, yeah. I told him, God, seriously, you told me, I told them, you said, tell them again. And so I told them. They're morons. They complain all the time. They whine. They blame me for stuff. Even my sister and my brother come against me. God, take them out.
Hold down your thunder.
Have at it, Lord. Thankfully, that's not what he did. In verse 11, Moses interceded. But Moses implored the Lord his God. That's an interesting way to say it, because previously he's saying, the Israelites are saying, this is our gods that brought us out of Egypt. But he wanted to distinguish, no, Yahweh is my personal God. Moses implored the Lord his God and said, oh Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out, to kill them in the mountains and consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self, and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven. And all this land that I have promised you I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever. Moses was asking for God to be faithful to what he has already said. Not just to Moses, but to everybody. You know how much easier it would have been? You know how cool it would have been for Moses, who, was the leader of 2 million people. He was a prince when he grew up. He had all the right to be prideful, and he could have said, God's starting over with me. Because, I did it right. But he chose not to. I'm going to put up with these people. He didn't know it was going to be for 40 years. But I'm going to put up with these people. And God, you said that you would be faithful here. Would you please be gracious to them? And then God did what? He relented. You know what some translations say? He repented. That's a weird word. What do we use repenting for? Sin. So did God repent in the same way that we do?
He said, and the Lord repented of the evil which he had thought to do unto his people.
Ooh, that's a weird translation. Say it again.
And the Lord repented of the evil which he thought to do unto his people. Repented of the evil. Yeah.
Repented of the evil.
Yeah, because he wanted to smite
But
it.
he's gonna do it.
Wait. God can't do evil. God can't even want to do evil. So, how does this work?
It's the wrath. So he repented of it.
But it said evil. And he repented from evil. Here's where translations do matter. Okay, this is an important distinction, and he's reading from the King James. So anything King James is going to emphasize those words and translate it that way. Just so you know how translations worked, the King James is translating from Latin into English. So that is the core text that they're looking at. Latin is not the original language that this was written in. This was written in Hebrew, okay, ancient Hebrew. And the New Testament was written in Greek. What happened along the way is Latin was the normal language for everybody. And so they translated these things into Latin, and they used that all throughout Christendom. Along the way, though, Latin stopped being spoken in the normal stuff, but guess who still got to read that? The church, the priests, those who had an education and could. So they were the only ones who could read it in Latin. Along the way, somebody said, we should change that up. In fact, it was King James. There were several others who said that, but King James put it into English for the first time. When they translated it not from Hebrew and Greek, but they translated it from Latin. So there's going to be a little bit of messiness, a little bit of inaccuracy. But man, for the very first chance they got, for the academic level that they had, for the way English was then, that's a pretty close way to see it. And God used that for a long time. But as academic and the language shifted and we understand more now, we now use most of our translations come directly from the oldest Hebrew and Greek texts, and there's a lot of stuff that goes along with it. If you want one that fits that and is really, really close translations, there's two that I recommend. One is the New American Standard Bible and the ESV. I preach from the English Standard Bible, English Standard Version. I don't know. There's a whole lot of different. So the New American Standard Version, New American Standard Bible is what I think they call it. But
And get the one that's done in 2020. It's different.
well, there's a few that are good, but if you get either the NASB or the ESV, the way that they do it is pretty close to word for word. If you go outside of those, they tend to do it more phrase by phrase. And sometimes they'll switch word order and stuff. They get the gist of it, and sometimes they're very, very close, but if you're doing an academic thing, just that. Now, all that to say, that was a lot to say. In this, when you interpret it or read it from the King James, you'll see that he repented from evil. But in the ESV, they say he relented from the disaster. In Hebrew, the word for evil and disaster is both, it's got the connotation, right? It still can mean similar things, but it's not a moral component. If, Lord, please don't let the hurricane come to us. If it is just some rain, but we don't want another disaster. For us, disaster feels like evil. When you're the receiving end of it, it can feel like evil, especially when it's a weather thing. And, you know, God's in control, right? He could choose to put that thing wherever he wants it. But when we feel it, we call it evil, even though it might just be a disaster. So, but God relented from. He abandoned. He chose a different way. But I thought you said God is sovereign, right? We mentioned God's sovereignty. God has a plan for all human history. Look over there. On that big wall, there is a planned history of human history, like from creation all the way till now. And you can see different forms of it, different places, different whatever. But history, God has a plan for all of that. And he's working, and he still always will work. So did God plan a disaster right here? Because he knew they were going to do it. Man, nobody's talking. Say what?
I don't think God has to plan anything.
He doesn't have to, but he does. And he planned this, he set this up and made the decision as a direct result of human choice. They chose to do the golden calf thing. And so, in response, he said, this is the consequence.
He didn't tell the people that he was going to do that. He told Moses. So the people didn't know that.
No, the people did not know that. Well, actually, they did. Because God told them earlier, if you obey me, everything's good. If you don't obey me, there's consequences. There's disaster.
But it's almost like it was a test. He knew he had Moses up there for 40 days. All right, let's see what the people will do. He knew what the people were going to do.
I don't think this conversation was about the people. Because the people already did their thing. They didn't know that God had said, I'm going to kill him. I think this was a relational thing between him and Moses. This was a conversation that he was having. But God said, this is my intention. To give them what they deserve. It's going to be a disaster. But my plan is that they get the wrath. And Moses could have said, yes, Lord. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's being obedient. That's being submissive, right? But he knew that there was a bigger story. And God was pulling that out of him. God was reminding him through this experience of a deeper, bigger thing. God's promise to us supersedes his wrath. God's grace and his plan for grace is bigger than his wrath. Will God's wrath have to be executed? Absolutely. His justice demands that every evil is paid for. But in his plan, his goal is not to just zap us and kill us. And Moses knew the heart of God enough to even say, God, I thought this was going to go differently. Can we please do it differently? And then God decided to change. God relented and said, I will do something different in direct response to Moses' choice. The people chose stupid. They chose wrath. In the conversation that Moses was having with God, God said, in direct response to what you are asking from me, I won't give all 2 million something people the wrath that they deserve.
Is this an echo of Christ saying, forgive them for they know what they do?
Absolutely. Moses is meant for us to look at and to see the snippets of salvation, the beginnings of it, and just get a clue for it. And Jesus modeled this absolutely in specifically what he said. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The difference here was that God was holding off his wrath for the people. With Jesus, God was pouring out his wrath on Jesus. And he knew that. Jesus knew, when I say this, I'm getting it. It's not... He knew he was going to get crushed. And he chose to say this. Moses asked God to do it a little differently. Does that make you uncomfortable? It makes me squirm. Because I wonder what it is that God has planned, a disaster that he's allowing. Maybe in direct result to behaviors that I've done, that you've done, whatever, that if in relationship, in my prayers, I intercede and I say, God, please, let's do it different. Please, can we do it differently? And he says, yeah, I was just waiting on you to say it. I want you to know this about me. What is it that I've missed? What opportunities have I missed? Now, God is sovereign. He already planned it out. He knew what I was going to do. So it's not a surprise to him. I'm not responsible for those things directly. However, what kind of blessings does God want to give to us that we just haven't asked for? You know, in the New Testament, it's different because we're not talking just wrath. God's already poured out his wrath on Jesus. Now we're talking, what are we told to pray for in the New Testament? His kingdom to come. His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. To not fall into temptation. What other things? Forgive us. Give us what we need, or daily bread. So we have the model of Jesus, the Lord's Prayer. Jesus' modeled prayer for us. But what other things are we asked to pray for? Or what did he tell the disciples about their prayers?
What they bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and what they unleash.
No, you don't ask amiss.
Whatever you ask, I will do. Whatever you bind up in heaven, I'll bind up here in legal terms. Whatever are you needing from God? Whatever do you want from God? That simple in relationship. When we're not worshiping these idols, but we're worshiping God and we're submitted to him and we're asking in his name, what is it that we could receive through him? What if it's simply that we would be freed from this? That we would actually live this out and this would no longer control us, but we would be submitted to him. I think it's beautiful that God would partner with humanity at all. And then that a prayer of a righteous person would avail much. That in relationship with God, when we ask for what we need and what we want, he honors that. I think it's beautiful and it's terrifying. So the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken on bringing on his people. Verse 15, then Moses turned and went from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets that were written on both sides, on the front and on the back they were written. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, engraved on the tablets. This is where I'm so sorry that Bill is not here, because Moses was the first one to download from the cloud onto his tablet.
For the record, Bill's gonna be really sad that he wasn't here.
He's going to miss that one.
Is it even friendly?
Yeah, there you go.
And yeah, God printed out on actual, you know. Okay, so God did this. He wrote it on these tablets. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was of God, engraved on the tablets. Verse 17. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, "There's a noise of war in the camp." But Moses said, "It is not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear." Okay. How did they hear such different things? Same sound. They interpreted it differently.
They have different stations. Joshua's a warrior, Moses isn't.
Joshua saw things from his position, his role. Honestly, Joshua knew how to relate to God through war. Joshua was, in fact, it was his role to wield the sword of God's wrath. When the enemies came, he was the one who did the warfare on behalf of God, that said, you are not supposed to be here. You are not supposed to be attacking the people. I will defend. And so he was so familiar with God's wrath that he expected that's what he was going to hear. So he interpreted Israel's word and sound to be of war. Moses, he knew what worship sounded like because that was his role. So he was familiar with it, but he also had heard God's explanation. So instead of just hearing from his perspective, he was hearing from God's perspective and interpreting that experience here and explaining it to Joshua. So, as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot. And he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. Okay, what caused Moses' anger to burn hot? He saw. He saw the dancing, he saw the calf, but God had already told him what was going on.
He wasn't expecting exactly what he saw, though,
Okay,
when God told him.
okay.
You have to keep reading to actually find out the rest of all of that. It ties in together.
It does.
And if you overlook it or don't go that far, then you're gonna be stuck trying to figure it all out. But we're so blessed because we have God's word.
And we can already see earlier why God was angry, because he specifically said, I have seen these people, but I hear them singing. And so God was angry at the worship. Moses was angry when he saw, not just heard. I wonder how often God tells us something, but we don't actually really get it until we see it. Until we see it play out, we don't really get it. If I were to tell you that there are people that are being trafficked right now, that there are sex traffickers that are kidnapping children, boys, girls, adults, all over the world, that there are hundreds of thousands of slaves being used for sex worldwide. And I don't like that. Let's pray about that.
It's always different when you pray.
But if I told you they are at the casino right now, that there is somebody being trafficked right now at the casino, and I showed you their picture, we're going to go get them. Our anger will burn hot. What if it was your kid? See, it's different when we see it for real. If I told you that there are hundreds of thousands, billions of people who are going to hell because they don't know the gospel, it's easy when they're out there, but what about your kid at your house that you know is not a believer? Your anger burns hot in a little different way. So God gave Moses the word, and then he let him experience that. I want us to experience the beauty and the contrast between worshiping God and worshiping the golden calf. I could tell you about it, but until you experience the freedom, the beauty of worshiping God by giving up control, giving up your comfort, giving up your approval and what other people think of you, and giving up your power completely over to God in your worship, so that your expression of worship, the singing that you sing, none of those things are influenced, but they all are given over to God. That's beauty. And until you experience that, you won't know what it's like. And I could tell you all day long how wonderful it is to express freely to God with no thought of what anybody else in the room is like, where you literally don't have control over your body anymore, where you are not comfortable. I can't express to you how beautiful it is to worship in Africa, where they have dirt floors, no air conditioning, it's hot as all get out, and there's sand, and you know how much I hate sand, despise it, but it's everywhere, and you get to worship God on the floor, in the sand, because you cannot stand in God's presence. I wish I could tell you what that's like, but until you experience that, you won't know that it's worth giving up the golden calf for. And Moses, he saw this reality, and it caused him to sin. Instead of it being a blessing for him to say, I already knew it was coming, he let his anger control him. And then he broke all the 10 Commandments at once. Another dad joke. But he broke the thing that God had crafted by hand. In our anger towards sin, which is good, we must be careful to not break God's law. We'll keep going on verse 12 or 20 later. But it gets a little bit weird. It's like, Moses, what was your strategy here, buddy? And we'll dig into that. But it's really strange when we encounter evil, the solutions we come up with to try to correct the situation. But God, first we confess that we are like the Israelites. That we come up with all different kinds of idols. They look a little different, but they're really the same. We can doll them up and form it however we want, but it's still not you. God, I ask that you would show us what it's like to be in your presence like Moses had. So that when we see any kind of worship that's not as pure as that, our anger burns hot. But Lord, before we point it towards someone else, I ask that we would be careful to point it towards ourselves. And that we would receive the grace that you have in Jesus, and that we would repent and be freed from all that junk. That we would learn to worship you completely, totally, freely. We would give up everything that's precious to us so that we can receive you. Help us to worship purely, to honor you in everything that we do. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.